Nighttime workers of Reddit. What's the freakiest stuff you've seen on the job? I'm a nurse. So I see a lot of freaky stuff working days at the hospital as well, but I used to work nights. There's a common phenomenon amongst dementia patients called sundowning. A dementia patient can be sweet and innocent all day, but once night falls they do a complete 180 and become agitated and often hostile. Also, more patients die on night shift for some reason. They always seem to want to crash around 3 AM. My great grandfather had sundowners. During the day he was perfectly lucid, remembered who people were, even called my grandmother all the time. When the sun went down he thought he was living in a hotel in Boise in 1939. My greatest fear is that I'm not actually doing this right now. I'm reliving 2020 from a rest home somewhere in 2050. Train inspector here. Walking a train in the middle of the night. Pitch black. Come up to a freight car that had 4 hobos sitting in it. Just staring at me. Dudes never said a word. Just watched me. I eased by them and kept going, but couldn't get past the feeling of them behind me for a good while. I knew a guy that was a hobo back in the day. He said it's gotten too dangerous now. Too many drugs and too many people willing to rob or stab you. Back in the day it was a community where everyone helped each other. There were places that were known to allow people to sleep. There was some rich lady that had a guest house where you could go. He even got to be in National Geographic. There was an episode called Love Them Trains, something like that. There is even a hobo convention, but I can't remember where they hold it. Worked third shift stocking shelves in a grocery store. Every couple of nights, a sweet little old lady would come in to buy vanilla extract to make sugar cookies for her grandkids and the neighbors. A few weeks go by, and I'm outside on a smoke break. I see our sweet grandma in her car, chugging vanilla extract. She was drinking it to get drunk and hide her alcoholism from her family. Years after that, I worked in a bar as a karaoke host. There was a hotel next door to the bar where some of the less fortunate people in town stayed. One of the hotel guests was a regular in the bar. This dude, his GF and I did a shot to celebrate him finding a good job and getting accepted to a trailer park. He goes next door to get a snack and says he'll be right back. 30 minutes later we see flashing lights outside. He got a snack of heroin, passed out in the parking lot next to his car, and had his head run over by another guest pulling into the adjacent parking spot. It bore a similarity to a watermelon at a Gallagher show. Post finale. I'll never see that. Worked as a office cleaner before COVID. 11 to 7 AM as a one-man team. One stormy night, I was on the phone while working when my connection started to fade in and out. All of a sudden there is just a deafeningly loud shriek coming out my phone and the power goes out. Even the emergency lights. I remember looking out the window of the 10th and seeing the whole industrial park black. Nights make everything creepy. Man, that reminds me. One time middle of the night, I'm outside on a smoke break and I just see this huge flash of light a little bits away preceded by the entire section of town our plant is in complete and utter darkness. Turns out a construction crew somehow blew a bunch of transformers. I used to work nights in a hospital setting. At one point, I was taking the city bus to work. There was a lady who got off the bus and left her baby. The bus driver pulled the bus over and tried to find her, but it was nighttime and he couldn't find her. He called the police. Before the police got there, the woman came running back, realizing that she had forgotten something. My boss did not believe me when I told her why I was late. Sleep deprivation is a real shitty thing. I worked nights at a dog kennel. During the night we'd just walk the dogs around the parking lot so they could go to the bathroom. The parking lot was surrounded by a wooded area on most sides. There was a stray cat colony living in the woods behind the parking lot. Every time I'd walk a dog through the parking lot the cats would sprint away and hide in the woods. They did not like the dogs at all. They were terrified of them. One night I'm walking a dog and I see the cats, but this time they are sprinting out of the woods toward me. All the cats just kind of gather in the middle of the parking lot, completely ignoring the barking dog I had. It definitely freaked me out. What was out in the woods that scared the cats out so much that they came running towards me and a dog they were usually terrified of? It was probably just a few coyotes or something. but it felt really creepy wondering what was scaring the cats so badly just out of view in the woods. Was standing topside watching the Navy at sea on a dark night when the sky suddenly turned bright. For about 3 seconds something was incoming so bright it lit all the weather decks up like daylight. This caused quite a commotion in the bridge and operations. We were forward deployed during wartime, although not in a region where active fighting was expected. Obviously everyone's worry was that we might be under attack. Then the sky went dark again, just as suddenly as it had began. The only one on the ship who had a direct view was me. "It's a meteor." Had to repeat that report with details a bunch of times until people calmed down. The thing broke up into 3 pieces and then vaporized in the atmosphere. It was possibly one of the southern Taurids. Right time of year, right part of the globe. And that meteor shower is known for producing fireballs. Being hundreds of nautical miles out on a moonless night, it was truly spectacular. That was far and away the most dramatic meteor I've witnessed, both in terms of the show it put on and in terms of the context. Lucky coincidence to be an astronomy buff standing the right watch at the right moment. I worked at an all-night diner while I was in college. One night at about 2 in the morning, a 4-year-old boy wandered in and said he was there to get some food for him and his little sister because they were hungry. When the manager asked where his parents were, he said they were sleeping at home and that they slept a lot and yelled at him and his sister to be quiet a lot. Turns out he lived at an apartment complex adjacent to the diner and the parents were heroin addicts. It was heartbreaking. Not specific to working night shift, but dead people. I work in a nursing home and unfortunately people dying is the name of the game. Sometimes you see people declining, so you know they are on their way out, and you do 15-minute checks on them and catch it fairly quickly. Other times people seem fine and they just go and you don't find them for an hour or so between doing rounds. I once spent a long time trying to convince a resident that the angel of death wasn't waiting for him. I sat with him for a while. We shared a hot cocoa. I checked and double checked his vitals, did all of his cares, held his hand, and talked to him about life until he felt better. He was smiling and calm again when I left his room. I finally left his room to wrap up charting and to check in with the nurse. He was gone. When I checked in about 30 minutes later, that one hit pretty hard. I worked the midnight shift at a crappy little gas station and saw a lot of weird stuff. The guy who claimed he was going to hit it big on the lottery, he would come in with an old baseball card album filled with his past lottery tickets. Like 10 years worth of old tickets. Each week he had a new scheme. Using crystals to divine the numbers. Using previous winning number combinations and dividing by specific numbers, etc. The lady who would always pay in pennies for the pack of Camel White non-filter, soft pack only. The meth addict who passed out in his car after buying a 44 ounces big gulp and a bunch of those energy pills. The same person who, once a month, would steal a 12 pack, but because he was part of the manager's family, blind eyes were turned. I was working overnight at a hotel and a guy came in with a hookah. Super confidently pours out a little pile of coke on the counter and tells me it's his payment for a room. He was more surprised than anyone should've been when it didn't work. Lol, must have been wasted. You think so? Not freaky, but I was sitting on a loading dock at 3 AM, very dark, smoking a cig. Saw a cat and I tried to get it to come over. It did. It wasn't a cat, it was a raccoon. Still fed it a cracker. I'm jealous. IDK, I stumbled on a family of raccoons at work and they rushed me like a trained army. Damn near cut off my escape. A gorilla. I work at Walt Disney World in Florida. And more specifically I work at Animal Kingdom, which is half theme park, half zoo. Now, due to Disney's conservation efforts, they give the animals quite a bit of freedom. They are enclosed, but the enclosures are very large, and their sleep areas are well outside of guest view. It's actually a pretty great setup for the animals. We also don't confine them to their sleep areas at night. So I was working the graveyard shift, 10:30 PM to 8 AM. And as I turn the corner to cross a bridge into the next area, I see a massive figure on the other side of the bridge. One of the gorillas had gotten out of their enclosure and was just walking around the park. I nearly shat myself, as, if you know anything about gorillas, They can be pretty violent. I called it into my boss, and they told me that this happens sometimes and to just stay away from it, and they will get the caretakers to come do their thing. Honestly, it was the craziest thing I've seen in my time there. Holy F. One night during a floor set at VS, we were throwing away trash and going in and out of the stockroom, cleaning the floor, removing merchandise, counting registers, opening boxes, etc. We had music blaring and we're singing, goofing off while working, and all of a sudden some lady walks out to the register and wants to purchase her items probably about 45 minutes after we closed and did the nightly routines of clearing out the fitting rooms, recovering the store, vacuuming. None of us knew she was there. None of us saw her. She wasn't in the store. She wasn't in the back. Not in the bathroom. Not under tables. We think she may have been hiding in the ceiling in the dressing room waiting for us to leave so she could rob the store, but since she realized we weren't leaving, she thought it best to come out. It was the absolute scariest moment. I think there were 12 of us in the store that night, all over the place, and none of us saw her. What if she had a gun or a knife or something? She totally could have gone through our personal items and taking things. But she paid for random things and left. She acted like nothing out of the norm was going on. I grew up on a farm. One night I was supposed to check the irrigation pumps at 2 AM. It's a 2-mile drive and I'm mostly asleep. I park the truck with the lights aimed at the river. When I get out, the headlights are projecting my shadow on rapid layers of fog coming from the river. Above that, the fog was dissipating into the wildest northern lights display I've ever seen. It was like a sheet being violently shook from one horizon to the other. The farm has no sound or noise pollution. There was nothing else to obscure it. The northern lights have a sound. It's like sand on rough paper. So I took several moments to just take in my silhouette was joined visually to green mist across the sky that filled my vision and my ears. I worked at the ArcLight, Bougie movie theater, and I'm a night person. So I usually got the last shifts, which meant I had to clear out every theater and then make sure all the trash bags hidden in the back hallway were clear and clean for the morning crew. The only freaky experience I had was seeing/hearing someone running throughout the hall, laughing and just being fucking weird. I thought it was a patron who was drunk, but it lasted for a good half hour, even though I had already called security to come escort them out. The security guards also heard the constant running footsteps, and we only ever caught glimpses of the back of the person. Scared the s out of us. Next day, I pull another night shift and see one of the guards who was on duty. He said they never found the guy and eventually the footsteps and laughing stopped. Still don't know what to make of it, but that was the only time anything like that ever happened. I used to work night shift maintenance at a recycling plant. You'd be amazed at all the sex toys and porn people throw away. A bunch of dirty dildos flopping down conveyor belts and Polaroids of amateurs. And they try to recycle them? I stocked shelves at Toys R Us overnight for 5 years. One night, the entirety of 3 walls of board games, 5 shelves tall, 3 feet deep, fell to the floor. Everything, except for a single Ouija board. We left early that night. I was leaving work at 11:30 the other night, and I hit a fatus with the door when I was leaving. Scared the s out of both of us. Edit. I just realized I left out the word raccoon. A coworker who ate a bunch of bananas every single night. Not one. A whole bunch from the supermarket. Not really freaky, but definitely baffling. Would also regularly offer me banana despite me saying every time I'm allergic to them, so no thanks. Just bizarre. He also had a drawer in his desk just stuffed full of staplers, which I know doesn't sound that weird in an office, but it was at least 20 staplers, none of which had staples in them. And I never saw him use one even once. Our printers had an automatic staple function, so they weren't needed at all. Years ago I worked for myself doing floor cleaning and waxing. A friend of mine asked me if I would do the floor of the meeting hall at his church. The church was from the late 1700s and was surrounded by an old cemetery. I would get there around 4 AM and finish by 6 or 7. My friend would usually come by around 6:30 with an egg sandwich and we'd have breakfast together as I finished. One night it was raining really hard and thundering and lightning. I was working and listening to music with my headphones like I normally did. As one song ended I could hear a lot of banging like someone was moving furniture in the adjoining offices. Office cleaners had come in the same time as me once or twice, so I thought it was them. The noise went on for a while. When my friend came by with breakfast I told him about the noises. He said the cleaners were let go months before and a church member did the cleaning during the day. We walked back and looked at the offices and everything was as expected. Then my friend told me that there were rumors the church was haunted, but he had never experienced anything. That was my last time working there. I worked at a hotel with a huge banquet room for parties of 300 to 400 people. It was a weeknight and typically the hotel has low guest count and no people in those rooms, so we turned the lights off. I was walking through that room to cut through and saw the outline of a person leaning against the wall at the other end of the room. I thought it was another worker named Simone, since he typically hung around that area since it connects to the pool to the hotel. I gave a head nod and said what's up. No response. Weird. Went about my way and left the room. Came back 10 minutes later and saw the same shadow outline standing there against the wall, and I said what's up, and still no reply. So I began to walk over and it became clear it wasn't Simone. I turned and left the room, finding it weird that someone was just standing in the banquet room with barely any lights on and not responding. The next day I asked Simone if he was in the room yesterday, and he said he wasn't working yesterday and neither was the other pool attendant. Yikes. How creepy. I found the guy who was going through people's desk drawers. Did he say he was looking for the stapler? He was from a completely different department and said he was looking for a band-aid. Unfortunately, he was in a laboratory space and passed by the extremely well labeled first aid kits at every door in the hallway. Night shift nurse here. It isn't freaky anymore because you get used to a lot of things with this job, but when you have a patient with dementia that sundowns, fairly alert and oriented during the day, much more confused at evening/night, and you walk by their room at 3 AM and hear this normally sweet old lady just cackling at the darkness. I work in a geriatric nursing home as night shift, and I often have this. One time I checked a room. The old lady was not in her bed. Then I looked to the window and got a heart attack. She was just standing and looked out of the window at night in total darkness.